Hello, hi there. So, I am very interested, to say the least, in ancient, mostly Indian understandings and philosophies, mostly Buddhism, but also um, Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, which in some ways you could say is similar to Buddhism. Not all would agree with that, but it's very interesting to look at anyway. And I've got this book with me here today, and it's very well known, even with some Buddhists. Um, and though not all Buddhists may agree with this, I think, as mentioned, there seem to be at least some points of convergence. There are clear disparities. Um, the Vedanta tradition puts things into a tradition of the divine, or framework of the divine, you could say, whereas Buddhism certainly doesn't do that. But there are points of similarity. Um, both talk about impermanence, both talk about um, the role of the senses in the sense that we are not the senses. That, for example, the six sense bases of the 18 dhatus in Buddhism look at how an idea of a self is created through the interaction of the five senses, or six in Buddhism. As in Buddhism, mind on a lower level is considered a sense base as well. Both consider transcending to be of importance. You might be able to say that what Buddhism considers the unconditioned, or if we can humbly say that the unconditioned is in Buddhism greatly revered and linked at least to the concept of nibbana and states of jhana, absorption, then in Vedanta there is the concept of Atma, of course, and whereas Atma could be understood by some as being self, it's clearly spoken of and written of as a wider self. And again, not all would agree, but it will be an interesting topic at least to discuss the similarity experientially of the unconditioned, if we can humbly consider that, and the self, the Atma, as its one complete oneness level. So just going to look at one chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, or a very small part of the chapter. This is called Renounce and Rejoice, chapter 5. And so we have Arjuna talking, who says, "O Krishna, you have recommended both the path of selfless action and sannyasa, the path of renunciation of action. Tell me definitely which is better." So this translation is by Eknath Eswaran, and I think it's great. And a great deal, I think it would be fair to say, of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the songs of blessed songs, holy songs, is on the subject of transcendence. Transcendence, what could we mean by that? Well, within the Bhagavad Gita, largely seems to suggest to us transcendence from one small self, if you like, an egoic understanding, to a non-dual experience. And non-dual we could relate to as a philosophical experience of oneness beyond the machinations or the construct of the ego, we could say, perhaps. So there are a range of topics brought up in it. Most of them, I think it would be fair to say, looking at how we might go about transcending that egoic experience. However, as said, unlike in Buddhism, which is strictly non-theistic, this is, I wouldn't say theistic, although some might disagree, but I would say it brings in the concept of the divine. So Arjuna says, "O Krishna, you have recommended both the path of selfless action and sannyasa, the path of renunciation of action. Tell me definitely which is better." So these two concepts alone are extremely interesting. We can see that word sannyasa and we hear it used relatively recently, at least from Osho, for example, who spoke about his sannyasins. And it kind of means, one who, I think this would be right to say, one who was given up the world, kind of. I think in this sense, at least, I think would be fair to say it's called Renounce and Rejoice, this chapter. So combining the metaphysical, we could say physical, though again, as a practicing Buddhist, it's not a term that's strictly considered Buddhist, certainly. O Krishna, you have recommended both the path of selfless action and sannyasa, the path of renunciation of action. Tell me definitely which is better. So Krishna says, both renunciation of action and the selfless performance of action lead to the supreme goal, but the path of action is better than renunciation. Those who have attained perfect renunciation are free from any sense of duality. They are unaffected by likes and dislikes, Arjuna, and are free from the bondage of self-will. The immature think that knowledge and action are different, but the wise see them as the same. The person who is established in one path will attain the rewards of both. The goal of knowledge and the goal of service are the same. Those who fail to see this are blind. So I think there's a lot in those couple of paragraphs, humbly. So Krishna is saying both renunciation of action and the selfless performance of action lead to the supreme goal. So renunciation of action, what could that mean? How could we understand that? Well, in a way, really, I think the term virakta or viragya, detachment, non-attached, is a really important word here. So it kind of means not identifying with your actions. Now, not in a careless way or an irresponsible way, you could say. It certainly doesn't negate ethical conduct, in fact, quite the opposite. But it does sort of imply that as a psychological mechanism toward joy in life, and this is true to the Buddhist understanding certainly as well, is that we cling to action that we've been involved with. And if we look at the 12 nidanas, we can see that this point of contact on the level of feelings really often creates this. So the wonderful thing I find about both Vedanta and of course Buddhism is this profound, sophisticated understanding of how and what we are and how we get into the states that we get into, and how with practice and understanding we can be free from those and move towards much more harmonious states, much more skillful states, I'd say, in Buddhist tradition. So renunciation of action really is, I think, coming from this sense of things, is that if we cling to action, if we perform something, if we're involved in something, a behavior, and then we cling to the results, we want to know, we want to, okay, well, great, how's that going to work out? Well, this is what Krishna, I think it's reasonable to say here, is classing as renunciation of action. And he's saying that renunciation of action and the selfless performance of action lead to the supreme goal. So an example of renunciation of action would be, let's say that you felt at work that you're going to do something that was really good to benefit that other person, a colleague, let's say. So how could we go about doing that? What would be the dynamics of that, if you like? Well, dynamics could be a thought, feeling, and you did something good. This is saying here, ultimately, you are not the doer. That's the key message of a lot of Vedanta, is you are not the doer. You are the divine. You are part of the one being, God. And again, that certainly wouldn't be conceptualized in Buddhism, but I think it's very, we can look at this comparison. So you are not the doer. So to cling to that action will cause you suffering. That's in a sense what we're saying. If you went home and thought, well, I did this and they haven't returned that favour, that kind of thing is likely to cause you difficulties. So it's saying that renunciation of action and the selfless performance of action lead to the supreme goal. So we might see there that selfless performance of action could be almost exactly the same as renunciation of action. And this is what this chapter is really about, saying that those two paths, which are suggested as paths to liberation, if you like, or non-dualism, or the realization of the goal, as it might better be phrased within Vedanta, both of those work the same. But then Krishna is saying, but the path of action is better than renunciation. So it says in the foreword of this that that's said perhaps because the person speaking to Arjuna, who is a warrior, it's said that is Krishna is saying perhaps for Arjuna this is better because Dharma is conceptualized slightly differently in Vedanta as in Buddhism, and within Vedanta it's one may have one's own dharma in a sense, which relates to one's mode of existence in a sense, or one's occupation maybe in a way. So it's saying, so the path of action is better than renunciation. And then it's saying those who have attained perfect renunciation are free from any sense of duality. They are unaffected by likes and dislikes. And we can see definitely a link to Buddhist practice here, because Buddhist practice, if we look at the Digha Nikaya, for example, and if we look at the understanding of the creation of a self, we could say perhaps, through the 6 sense bases or the 18 dhatus, how sense and sense object work in conjunction to create the experience of a separate self, if we don't understand it, which creates duality. And duality we're looking at here as disharmony, really. And we might humbly translate that as wrong view in Buddhism, which would mean the idea that we're separate from all of nature is one way we might be able to translate that. So there's a practice in Buddhism, certainly in the Majjhima Nikaya, it's mentioned as well, which is just watching experience and not rejecting and not accepting, basically. So it's the understanding that all day long, pretty much, on the level of all levels of our consciousness, which within the Buddhist understanding is created largely by the interaction of sense spaces, eye, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and in Buddhism, the mind at a lower cognitive level as just a formation for sensory experience, much like in conditioning of behavioral psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy. So these sense bases are instrumental in creating our experience of things. And what is posited within Buddhist understanding is that all these, at a subtle level, what we're kind of doing often all day long, is either experiencing yes I like, no I don't like, or neutral experience, based towards all perceptual experience, which comes through those senses. It's a sophisticated and sublime analysis. And that creates a great deal of oscillation and confusion within a being. And hence the need for practice, hence the need to understand yourself, and hence then many would say the great benefit of Buddhist practice and understanding. So, yeah, this idea of likes and dislikes, the Buddhist practice such as that would be, one way would be to watch your experience, and on a subtle level, you'll see where you're forming a pull towards, a push away, or a neutral experience. And we could perhaps compare that to this experience being talked about here, where Krishna is saying they are unaffected by likes and dislikes. And what seems, some might say, to be the case is that is it possibly the case that experientially these two schools, if you like, of practice and thought are leading towards a similar experience? And again, he says, so they are free from the bondage of self-will. So within Buddhism, really it's seen that this conceptualization of an egoic self, small self, is the cause of delusion and suffering. And here, this term self-will is, we could say that that's leading to that. It says the immature think that knowledge and action are different, but the wise see them as the same. So the immature think that knowledge and action are different. So we could see that perhaps there then as knowledge. In Vedanta, there are four paths to great understanding, if you like, or to unity, and joy and all those positive states. And they are, one of those is knowledge, as in gnosis, as in knowledge of one's true being. And he's saying that a lot of people think that action is very different from that, and you can't really get wisdom from action. But he's saying you can, by understanding and renouncing, not clinging to the results of how you've acted in the world. You can be selfless, and in that selflessness you can act with great skill, and you will not cause yourself the troubles of becoming unhappy by clinging to your behaviors. It says the person who is established in one path will attain the rewards of both. The goal of knowledge and the goal of service are the same. Those who fail to see this are blind. The goal of knowledge, and the goal of service are the same. So perhaps then knowledge gained, let's say, through meditation, and perhaps understanding of these instructions on what we are, whether in Vedanta or Buddhism, lead to perhaps a state of joy. Again, we could maybe say the unconditioned within Buddhism. And the goal of service are the same, he's saying. So the goal of service, again, therefore, is an understanding of non-self. Because in selfless service, you are selfless. It's an understanding that this self doesn't exist. And the goal of knowledge is to realize that the self doesn't exist. So he's saying that they are the same. And so Vedanta puts forward four clear different paths. Jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, selfless service, and Raja yoga, and to these realizations. So I think that is wonderful. And it is interesting to see that there is perhaps some crossover in Vedanta and Buddhist practice. So I'm endlessly fascinated by these things. So whether you are, then don't know, but I hope that might have been interesting. Many thanks. Have a nice day.